much, Honorable Minister Dominic Gaskin, for those kind words as it relates to the development of the business sector and the business economy in Guyana. As the Minister indicates that while we will focus on the development of our energy security in the long run, our food security is most important as well. So, Honorable Minister, we do understand that you have to move on to a cabinet meeting this morning. We do thank you for taking some time to be with us and share your thoughts on the development of the sector as we move forward. During the course of today, we will be focusing on business opportunities for Guyana, and we will hold your kind words in our focus as we move forward. Thank you very much, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, while we excuse the Minister to move on to his next business of the day, we will move into our presentations for this morning, and the sessions will be moderated by Mr. Vishnu Durga, who is the immediate past president of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and he's also the head of Action Coach Guyana. And he's been very vibrant in the development of business in Guyana and coaching persons as it relates to business opportunities and how best they can improve on their own individual competitiveness of being part of not only the local economy but the global economy as well. So we'll now invite Mr. Vishnu Durga to the podium to moderate the first session. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome everyone. Just reflecting on what our minister would have just said made me think about a quote by Mr. Eric Geiger. If you want to make everyone happy, don't be a leader, sell ice cream, or maybe oil and gas supplies. To get us started this morning, we will have Mr. Kevin Ramnarine, the former Minister of Energy and Energy Affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. During his tenure in that particular role, he was credited with opening up Trinidad and Tobago's deep water acreage to explore exploration. As Minister, he presided over a fourfold increase in petroleum-related foreign direct investment from US $501 million in 2010 to US $1.9 billion in 2014. He also oversaw the first energy-related initial public offering in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. The TTNGL Phoenix Park IPO went on to become the largest IPO in the history of Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange. He holds a BSc in Chemistry, an MSc degree in Petroleum Engineering, and an MBA. He is also a member with the University of Texas, Austin, and he also writes a weekly column in the Trinidad Guardian newspaper that focuses on the economic and energy issues. For his contribution to the development of the Trinidad and Tobago energy sector, he received the award of Energy Executive of the Year from the Petroleum Economist magazine in 2014. With all that said, I would now like to welcome Mr. Kevin Ramnarine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Durga, Minister Gaskin, executive members of the Guyana Oil and Gas Association, colleagues, distinguished colleagues of the oil and gas industry in Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Canada. It feels like we are in an energy conference back home. It feels like we are in the Hyatt in Port of Spain. What a lovely hotel and what a lovely city. Today my presentation looks at lessons for Guyana, oil and gas. And I thought about, in thinking about this presentation this morning, we think about history. And those of you all who know me know that I am a lover of history because I believe to understand the present and the future, one must understand the past. So, what is the gravity of the moment? And I thought I would just, and I hope this works, because it's, all right, I sure had more than one slide. So, this gentleman here in the picture, very handsome gentleman, looks like a movie star. He is Ibn Saud, King Ibn Saud, known in the Western world as Ibn Saud. In the Eastern world, in Saudi Arabia, where he's from, his name is much longer than Ibn Saud, and I wouldn't attempt to pronounce it. And he was the first king of Saudi Arabia. And on the 3rd of March, 1938, almost 80 years ago, he got some good news from a company called Standard Oil of California that they had discovered oil in the deserts of Arabia. Of course, Standard Oil of California went on to become a little known company called Chevron, and Saudi Arabia went on to become one of the world's leading producers of oil. The other picture is a picture of the infrastructure. This is now, I'm moving to the year 1969. That is a picture of the Ekofisk field in the Norwegian North Sea. Ekofisk was discovered in 1969. So I put up those two events, 1938 in Saudi Arabia and 1969 in Norway's North Sea, to bring to you all the gravity of the moment that has dawned on Guyana in the year 2015. I'm told I have 25 minutes. The last time I spoke at a Goga event, I had an hour and a half. That was a test match. This is 2020, right? So let's move very quickly. So let's come to Trinidad and Tobago. And we dealt with 1938 and we dealt with 1969. Trinidad and Tobago's oil industry was born in 1908, long before Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and Norway. We currently produce 75,000 barrels of oil per day. Our peak production was 1978. We have one refinery owned by Petrotrin with a capacity of 165,000 barrels of oil per day. We currently produce 3.3 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day, and that's actually similar to what the UK produces and what Argentina produces. So that's a pretty big natural gas industry. And most of our natural gas is produced from offshore on the continental shelf by multinational corporations. And the last sentence here, we have no deep water discoveries, and in brackets, as yet, right? We hope, we live in hope. This is a graph that shows the history of the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago from 1908 to the year 2015. And this is what we call land-based oil production over that period. The peak being in the late 1960s. That's land-based oil production. This is marine oil production, that green wedge, the peak being in the late 1970s. And that, of course, is our tsunami in Trinidad, our natural gas tsunami, with the peak being in the year 2010. All three aspects are in decline: marine oil, land oil, and natural gas. We believe that we hope that if we were to extend our graph out, we would see a new wedge coming in there called deep water oil, right? But so far, there's been no commercial discovery of oil in deep water. We've produced 8.4 billion barrels of oil equivalent since 1908. Of course, you know, barrels of oil equivalent is a way of calculating, of expressing natural gas as barrels of oil. What does that mean? Liza is 1.2 to 1.4 billion barrels of oil. So with your first commercial discovery, you've discovered recoverable reserves equivalent to 17% of what Trinidad has produced in 180 years. I thought I would share my personal and guiding philosophy, because I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to tell you my experience, my observations, and it's for the people of Guyana and the government of Guyana to make up their minds on what they want to do and to define their destiny. So what's the big idea? What's the big idea? And the big idea, and this took some time to write, petroleum producing countries must have a competitive investment environment that attracts capital and strikes a balance between fair returns to the state for extraction of its resources and fair returns to the investor for the risk it has taken. Okay? So we must be fair to the state and we must be fair to the investor. And that simple sentence there is what guided my philosophy for 4 years and 3 months as Minister of Energy in Trinidad. And I would further summarize it like this, drilling down into that philosophy. 1, maintain the integrity of the Ministry of Energy. Respect is earned. 2, appreciate that oil and gas is a long-term business, it's high risk and it's capital intensive. And never compromise safety for production results. There were times in those 4 years and 3 months when we could have compromised safety for production, and we took the high ground and we said, focus on safety. 4, recognize companies that have demonstrated a long-term commitment to your country. Exxon will become to Guyana what BP is to Trinidad, and therefore that relationship will be the most significant relationship in Guyana, the relationship between the government of Guyana and Exxon. And it's a relationship that has to be based on mutual respect and a relationship that has to be managed from both sides. 5, companies will invest. You must know that companies will invest if they think they can get a minimum return that satisfies their shareholders. That minimum return varies from upstream company to upstream company, but is usually around 12 to 15% as a minimum. 6, always remember that capital is mobile. And this is my philosophy. This doesn't have to be yours, so I'm just telling you what my philosophy is. Always remember that capital is mobile. It does not have to come to Guyana. It does not have to come to Trinidad. It probably will not go to Venezuela at all. And it goes to where it is treated best. So the countries in the world that have been most successful at attracting capital know that. And 7, I believe, my personal view is, always try to do business with the best companies in the world. I like brands, okay? And these are some of the companies in Trinidad. I like the brand name companies, Reputation, Safety, Shell, Repsol, BP, BHE Billiton, and EOG Resources. Those are the major multinational players in Trinidad. And of course, I can't teach anybody anything according to Socrates. I can only make them think. So, a couple more guiding philosophy points. The government is in a partnership with the oil companies. We are not in an adversarial relationship with the oil companies. And that is something that that was a thinking I had to change at the Ministry of Energy in 2011. These are our partners. We are here to collaborate with them. They are not our adversaries. 9, the public should directly own part of the energy sector. And that is where we talked about the IPO in Trinidad, the Phoenix Park IPO. And 10, and this is my personal view, state ownership should give way to broad private ownership. And notice I use the word broad private ownership and not a concentration in the hands of a few. Because in preparing for this lecture, I looked at Ghana. Ghana started to produce oil in 2010. Since then, Ghana's Human Development Index has not moved very much. But in reading the stories on Ghana and what has happened in the last 7 years, a handful of people have gotten very rich. So therefore, I'm of the view, and my philosophy is that state ownership should give way to broad private ownership. And this is the model basically. You give companies the correct incentives, it leads to investment, that leads to drilling, drilling leads to reserves and production leads to government revenue. It's a no-brainer, but some countries just don't get that, right? So they break down at the first block. And the result is, and I call this upstream activity on steroids. This is the result of properly incentivizing the upstream in Trinidad and Tobago. I have many more pictures, but I only had space for 4 pictures on my slide. But we got the upstream investing again heavily in Trinidad and Tobago because they were properly incentivized and because of the relationship between the ministry and the upstream players was based on mutual respect and that we were here to collaborate. And another project, this is an example of getting the upstream going again. This is the Juniper project. I was speaking to a friend from Ernst & Young about it. That's August 2014. BP signed the contract for the construction of the Juniper platform, the largest single upstream investment in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is 2.5 years later. I'm no longer minister 2.5 years later, so I'm not in a jacket and tie, but I still went down to the yard and took that lovely picture. So in Trinidad, we got some things wrong and we got some things right. It can't be perfect. And there is a continuum of countries. If you look at all the countries in the world that produce oil and gas, There is this continuum that starts at the bottom with Nigeria and Norway, Nigeria and Venezuela, and goes all the way to Norway. And you all in Guyana have to determine or decide where you want to be on that continuum. I'm sure you want to be closer to Norway than the countries at the bottom of the continuum. And of course, I am always asked, where is Trinidad and Tobago on that continuum? And that is debatable. And we feel free to discuss that at a cocktail reception sometime later. But what did we get wrong? And this is not a Kevin Ramnarine list. This list was generated by me talking and circulating emails around to a number of my friends in the industry. So these are my thoughts and their thoughts. The first thing, low levels of productivity and accountability at state-owned oil companies. The Trinidadians in the room, I see their body language in accordance with that. 2, counterproductive industrial relations climate. We have a combative industrial relations environment in Trinidad around the energy sector. Failure to maintain aging assets, especially those operated by the state. And notice that the first 3 points have the word state in them, okay? 4, there's been no enforcement of local content requirements. We don't have a local content bill or act, and therefore there is no enforcement of local content requirements, apart from what is put into the clauses of the production sharing contracts. 5, we've had an uncompetitive fiscal regime for many years, and that serves as a disincentive to investment. And that's a big reason why that tsunami graph is beginning to trend downward. 5 more things. We put a lot of subsidies on energy for domestic use, and that distorted the economy, as subsidies always do, and it created huge inefficiencies and wastage. Trinidad has spent 36 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars in the last 15 years subsidizing fuel. We are building a highway that cost about $7 billion in Trinidad. So we could have built 5 of those highways with that subsidy. We also subsidize electricity in Trinidad, and of course liquid fuels. 7, and this is a big one for Guyana, inadequate resourcing of those areas in the public service that regulate and oversee the oil and gas sector. The state's regulatory and oversight capacity over the sector is an asymmetrical relationship. We have increasing red tape in Trinidad, and I put in the lovely term there, torturous regulatory mazes. We have more red tape in Trinidad now as opposed to less red tape. And the thinking is, for those people in the regulatory sector in Guyana, the thinking is that we don't want people to compromise their regulatory processes. We want them to do it faster and more effectively. Because when you delay an oil and gas project, you are delaying the country's economy. So we have had this challenge in Trinidad, particularly as health and safety regulations have become more robust and more onerous over the last decade. Failure to fully insulate the state oil company, and to a lesser extent the state gas company, from political decision making. And we had a longer list at the last speech, but I thought 10 would be enough today. I think we had about 15 last time. And we had more, but 15 was a short list. 10, low equity position in the liquefied natural gas business, and little control over the marketing of liquefied natural gas. We have 4 world-class LNG trains. We own 10% of train 1, 0% of train 2, 0% of train 3, and 11.11% of train 4. So our ownership, and the critical word here, the critical buzzword here now is ownership. Our ownership of that critical sector should have been a lot better, a lot higher than, but that is a consequence, a critique of history now. So what did we get right? We did get some things right. And the first thing I would say is, this goes for many countries around the world, so don't feel too special, Trinidad and Tobago. But many countries have this, and we have this too. a mainly stable political and economic environment, and an independent judiciary. Multinational companies tend to like that. Then we have a stable contractual environment. There's respect for sanctity of contract. We have successful utilization of natural gas for the use as ammonia, methanol, and liquefied natural gas. That's a success story in Trinidad. The National Gas Company, I would say, is a success story. It's 41 or 42 years old, established in 1945. Oil and gas revenue in Trinidad has been invested in education. GATE is the acronym for the Government Assisted Tertiary Education Program. That's free tertiary education in Trinidad, paid for by the taxpayer. We established the University of Trinidad and Tobago. We have UWI St. Augustine, MIC Metal Industries Company, and the National Energy Skills Company. So we got that right, training. We established a Heritage and Civilization Fund in 1999, and it formally was legislated in 2007. It has now over $5.5 billion. Perhaps when I go back home, it may have less, but right? Because the Minister of Finance has been drawing down from it, but I think it's now at 5.5. While this is a part of the things we got right, there's a school of thought which I share that this should have come a lot earlier in the history of the country. What we got right: recent incentives for exploration and development drilling have worked. Skills training. Originally, skills training was with the multinational corporations, Texaco and Shell, and now through National Energy Skills Corporation, MIC, and a private company called Kenson. 9, there's a strong focus on safety in Trinidad and Tobago's oil and gas industry. It's inspired by the multinationals, and it's maintained throughout the sector, even in the state sector. And last but not least, we have good collaboration between the industry organizations. PLE is the Point Lisas Energy Association. It's an amalgam of the companies in Point Lisas. STOW is Safe to Work. It's a standard that is maintained by the Energy Chamber. And of course, we have the Energy Chamber themselves. So, the Guyana Oil and Gas Association is very important in coordinating the emerging oil and gas industry of Guyana. Some of the key differences between Guyana and Trinidad, something I thought about. Trinidad inherited an established oil industry in 1962. The industry was in place since 1908. Guyana, on the other hand, their industry is starting 50 years, almost 50 years after independence. Trinidad's industry started on land and moved to deep water. Curry goat and goat curry. All right? It makes sense. We have natural deep water harbors in Trinidad. Guyana doesn't have a natural deep water harbor. Our industry is natural gas centric. Guyana's industry looks like it will be oil centric. We have a mixed fiscal system in Trinidad because of the age of our industry. Before the age of production sharing contracts, the lawyers will tell you we went into the era of licenses. So we operate a hybrid system, tax royalty, license on the one hand, and production sharing contracts on the other hand. Guyana is into the production sharing contract, and I think they should stay with the production sharing contract. And last but not least, we have had no challenge to our sovereignty. Guyana has had a challenge to its sovereignty. And I have been studying this matter of Guyana and Venezuela, and I was told, be very careful what you say about that. But I would say it is a matter that has to be resolved. And I've been reading a lot of literature while I'm here on this matter, and I think that the multinationals that are investing in Guyana and are preparing to invest in Guyana have nothing to worry about. I think that the claim is, for all intents and purposes, weak and or baseless, and that will be determined finally by the United Nations. And hopefully that matter is put to rest. So comparing the two countries again, this is a graph of the GDP of the two countries from 1960 to 2015. And I don't know if I have a pointer here, but this is Trinidad in the blue, and this is Guyana in the orange. This bump here, by the way, this is around the time I was born. So Trinidad started to become very prosperous as soon as I was born, right? This is a period in time that we fondly referred to in Trinidad as the oil boom in Trinidad. And that had to do with the quadrupling of oil prices in 1974 because of the Arab oil embargo and the Yom Kippur War and so on. But we also had a huge increase in production in the early 1970s because Amoco had discovered oil on the east coast of Trinidad and they had started to produce it. And then we went into the recession of the 1980s. And then we started to come out of this, and this is what I call the gas tsunami of the 1990s and the early 2000s. Then you have, of course, the subprime mortgage crisis here, and the economy begins to recover, and now back down again. Okay? And we'll talk, you've probably heard the term Dutch disease too many times. So, coming to the end now, not always a bed of roses, all that glitters is not gold. And I spoke about Ghana. I have not seen a noticeable change in their Human Development Index, but they're producing a lot of oil. They went from 0 to 100,000 barrels very quickly. So this gentleman here is well known to everybody in this room. If you're from the United States, this gentleman is Brian Lara. And this picture was taken in 2004 when he made 400 not out in Antigua in a test match against England. And whenever Brian Lara does well, the West Indies team tended to win. So there's an economist at UWI, Dr. Raja Hussain, who is doing a statistical analysis of Lara's performance and comparing it to the West Indies' performance. And it shows that when Lara did well, the West Indies did well. They either drew a test match or they won a test match. But then, when Lara didn't do well, this is Lara being bold, the West Indies tended to lose. So that is the essence of what Minister Gaskin was talking about. The over-reliance on one sector is a very dangerous thing to allow your country to fall into. Oil and gas could become the Brian Lara of Guyana. And when he makes runs, all is well. And when he is clean bowled, then you're in trouble. So this is what I call my killer slide. I always have one killer slide. This is called the revenue roller coaster, and this is Trinidad and Tobago's revenue for, I think this is the last 6 or 7 years. So that's our government revenue. The first bar you're seeing up there is the year 2008. And the year 2008 was a really good year for prices. The oil price hit $148 a barrel, and the gas price at Henry Hub hit about $13.50 per MMBTU. So that was really a good time for Trinidad. And then we had the subprime mortgage crisis, and you see what happened. The roller coaster went right down. Because as the subprime mortgage crisis happened, global demand fell, and oil prices and gas prices fell, and Trinidad's roller coaster went down. And then the roller coaster started to go up, and it reached this peak here of 58.4 billion in 2014, and now, of course, the roller coaster is coming back down again. Okay? So that, the other bar there would be oil and gas revenue, and of course the orange bar would be total government revenue. So you can see what's happening. Oil and gas revenue down, subprime mortgage prices, gradual recovery, down again because prices have been low for the last 2 years. So last year we collected $7.9 billion in oil and gas revenue as compared to 28.1 is that a couple of years before. So this graph now, the blue, and let me just, for dramatic effect, do that again. That's the oil price. So you can see that the graph, the roller coaster, is really a function of the oil price. So the price fell here, the price recovering here, and the price down again. So that's what I call the revenue roller coaster. And when your economy becomes too dependent on oil and gas, you become a rider of the revenue roller coaster. This is the real economy. I put this up again for effect, because GDP is something that if you explain GDP, try to explain GDP to a taxi driver, right? Just try, all right? This shows years, oil revenue, oil prices, cement sales in Trinidad and Tobago, and new vehicle sales. Of course, these are the years when the price of oil started to fall. And have a look at what's happening to cement sales and new vehicle sales. Cement sales significantly down from 2015 to 2016, and new vehicle sales significantly down because government revenue has fallen. So that is what happens when Brian Lara does not make runs. Okay? You sell less cement and less cars. And as I said, all that glitters is not gold. The pictures above are pictures of oil spills in Trinidad. While I was minister, we had 2 oil spills. December 2013, damaged, destroyed my Christmas vacation. I spent my Christmas vacation here. And I was going on vacation when that happened. And I remember the story of a gentleman called Tony Harewood. You know who Tony Harewood was? Tony Harewood was the CEO of BP. And when the oil spill happened in 2010, he decided to go on his yacht. And he said, I want my life back. And BP gave him his life back. So I told my wife, I said, there is no way I am going on vacation while this is happening in Trinidad and I am the Minister of Energy. So we stayed and we cleaned it up. And this is something Guyana has to get pretty up to speed with. Once you produce oil, it is inevitable that at some point in time, you will have an oil spill. It goes without saying. Every country that has produced oil, even the countries with the best standards in the world, have had oil spills. So therefore, you need an oil spill contingency plan. And there's a very good one that was finished in 2013. And when it was finished in 2013, in October 2013, at the launch of the plan, I said, gentlemen, let's hope we never have to use this. And 2 months later, we had this scenario here. So Murphy's Law. The other challenge, all that glitters is not gold, industrial relations issues. And this is something which plagues Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector pretty often. And I am just saying that this may also creep into your emerging sector. So finally, recommendations for Guyana. The first one, you've heard it many times, so I wouldn't even bother to repeat it. The second point, industry regulators should be a separate entity from the entity that manages acreage and does upstream business development. That is international best practice since the Macondo oil spill. The United States has changed their architecture for managing their sector, and they've separated the two, because it's a conflict of interest to be the regulator and the developer of business at the same time. 3, and this is a big one, compensate persons in the employ of government agencies that regulate or oversee this sector on par or better than their peers in the industry. If you don't do that, you will end up with all the brightest Guyanese working for Exxon. This is what has happened in Trinidad and Tobago. Recommendations, again, an intense focus on human development, but it should not only be a focus on people getting geology and engineering degrees, also a focus on technicians. 5, make data available to the public without, of course, breaching the provisions of confidentiality in the contracts, and that allows for better governance of the sector. If the public knows what is happening and the public is allowed to scrutinize what is happening, it allows for better governance of the sector. And that's where the EITI comes in, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. I recommended this in January, establish 3 state enterprises, 1 for exploration and production, 1 to develop infrastructure, and 1 to market product being oil or natural gas or derivatives thereof. And you have some pretty good examples of state oil companies These are what I consider best in class: Ecopetrol of Colombia, Statoil of Norway, and Petronas of Malaysia. Those companies must be insulated from political influence, and I recommend in Norway Statoil model of appointing boards. Okay, I would make shares in those 3 companies available to the public via initial public offerings or additional public offerings, and there of course is a reference point, the Phoenix Park IPO in Trinidad and Tobago of 2015. I would recommend that Guyana go downstream of oil and natural gas to maximize the value that accrues to this country from its depleting resource. It cannot simply be that Guyana just exports crude oil. I know there are challenges, feasibility challenges, technical challenges with refining and so on, but it has to be constantly looked at. Last, but by no means least, I would empower the private sector to support as much as they could the supply chain that supports this industry, and that speaks to local content and the role of the private sector, which must be central and not peripheral. I would just close by saying that Guyana is at the beginning of the creaming curve, and the creaming curve is simply a graph. This graph shows the creaming curve for Norway, and where there is one, you'll continue to find more and more oil. As somebody said, elephants don't travel alone. So the creaming curve has held all over the world, and therefore it means that Guyana will continue to discover more and more oil as the companies explore. You have to guard against resource curse and Dutch disease. And I put this slide up here from Time magazine, this quotation: how the nation with more oil than anywhere else in the world fell apart. That's the cover of Time magazine, August 2016. And the lesson from that is, it is possible to get it totally wrong. See next door, right? Conclusion: Guyana has a golden opportunity to get it right from the start. And there are enough examples in the world of oil and gas, of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Feel free to study them as much as possible. Secondly, Guyana in 2015, and I use 2015 as the point, the date, because that's when the commercial discovery was made. Guyana in 2015, ladies and gentlemen, is not Norway in 1969. Develop the Guyana model that would be unique to Guyana's circumstances, economic and social. Norway in 1961, I keep saying, was the 2nd richest country in Scandinavia, second only to Sweden, with established industries, shipbuilding, fisheries, established universities, and so on, pretty good infrastructure. Guyana is not Norway. Guyana must develop its own model. And last but not least, recently the Pope met with the leaders of the European Union, who is celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome. And the Pope said to them, put people at the center of development. And you cannot develop an economy and a country without developing the people. So those will be my concluding remarks. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention.
As Assistant Managing Director of VSH Transport, the Terminal Operations, stevedoring, and Custom Broker House, he has been active for the past 3 years in the offshore projects in Suriname. So we will now hear for the second of 3 2020s from Mr. Shortport. Please join me in welcoming him.
Okay, good morning all. Before I start, I'd like to thank the Guyana Oil and Gas Association for this opportunity, and also for organizing this event, because as a neighboring country we look with great interest to the developments here in Guyana. We have a little bit experience in Suriname with the offshore exploration projects. And of course, we hope for the same success in our waters as in Guyana, but still, it's a great interest to us. And I'd like to share some of our experience in new and introduction in the oil industry in our country. We have some, so as I said, the oil business is not very new in Suriname. It started in the 1960s when oil was discovered while drilling for water in Saramacca area, which is sort of a little bit to the west side of Suriname. And it was it was onshore. Some exploration was done, and in the end, the discoveries were to be produced, and a state-owned company, Staatsolie, State Oil, was established in 1980 to make sure that all interest for the oil and gas industry in Suriname was looked after, and their responsibility is to make sure that all rules and regulations for the oil sector on behalf of the government are being looked after in terms of policies. They've been growing ever since, and now they have about 1,000 employees. And then they are active in exploration, production, refining, sales and transport of oil. They run tankers of oil within the Caribbean. They have gas stations also, GoTo in Suriname, and they have their own exploration products, some production also in the Saramacca, where it was in the Tambarejo fields. And they have built a refinery which is in production since November 2015. And they have a capacity of the refinery of about 15,000 barrels, and it is made for the oil, the type of oil, and the amount of oil found in Suriname.